Hi, I'm Paul Clolery. I'm editor-in-chief of the Nonprofit Times, and welcome to this conversation with myself, Jackie Tiso, who's the longtime CEO and founder of JMT Consultant, somebody I know who was among our first calls when I can understand something, which is generally very, very often, and Emily Sachs, who's an executive and consultant to nonprofits. Guys, been a busy tech couple of weeks, hasn't it?
Yes.
The COVID crisis, not just in the United States, but around the world, has pretty much laid bare some of the challenges of technology within the nonprofit sector. What are some of the challenges your clients are seeing, Jackie?
We've seen everything from, being unfamiliar with working in a home office and the equipment that you need to have and how do you connect into meetings and get your computer running and Zoom meetings through to actual challenges with connecting to your organization's software, so you can get the other things working, but then you can't get into your software, through to all of the normal issues that happen with technology, security and ransomware attacks and all other kinds of great things.
Yeah, I know you can put together a terrific Zoom meeting or use another format or another platform to get a meeting together. Then one of your geniuses would be using their phone and you'll have feedback across the whole system. So how important is it for everybody to have the same technology, or at least access to a basic level of technology, and what would that be?
Well, I'll jump in first here. It's hugely important, and it's something that we've been trying to stress for years with our nonprofit clients, and it is hard. There's so many constraints, but it's so important. And what COVID has done is brought it home all the more. I think it's really identified a lot of the struggles that nonprofits have lived with for a long time and didn't realize how many workarounds they were actually doing, and how it was impacting their productivity and what they're able to get done.
Wow. Go ahead, Emily, jump in
I was
there.
going to say, I was going to add sort of two of my mantras are always training and communications. So for example, with your example with the Zoom, I frequently will have people test on Zoom. If I have a new consultant and they haven't done Zoom before we have a committee meeting or before we have some other meeting, I'll work with them to make sure they're familiar and comfortable with the technology, because everybody's using something different. So I think testing and training and communicating with people and helping them feel comfortable before they're sort of on the spot is really helpful also.
Yeah, well, you can pre-disaster things all you want, but then you'll have this genius who thinks they can go to Starbucks and use their phone, and that pretty much ends it right there. Talk a little bit about the highlights of the need for good technology right now. I mean, Jackie was just making reference earlier to ransomware and hacking. There's been some real incidents in the sector recently, and some bold-faced names.
Yes, and it's interesting. I think there's actually, in some ways, I think a concerted effort that is happening where they've identified this segment and some of these players in the space to go after. And it's a very serious thing. And our clients, we've had clients on both applications that have been impacted significantly for a month or more. And in the case of Blackbaud, and everyone's seen the what's come out recently about that. Being unaware, wasn't communicated exactly what was happening there. And, that's something else that, along with everything else that you're dealing with, having that lack of communication and visibility to what's going on in the space and the impact it could have into your organization is hugely detrimental.
Talk a little bit, if you would, about contractual arrangements with providers such as Blackbaud and others. I mean, from what I'm understanding and from interviews that I've done in the last few days, we, as you know, broke the story a while back. They knew about this on February 7th and didn't tell anybody until July 16th. Is there some sort of contractual clause that you can put into contracts with any technology provider that says you must communicate within 48 hours?
We have our, like the publishers that JMT works with. That's one of the things that we're ensuring on our clients' behalf, that you have, certain markers, if you will, and communication, for example, is one of them. Percentage of downtime, as an example, is another one. What's the recourse if the system is down and you're unable to get to your data? So I think there's a number of aspects that you can do in this. And we tell our clients all the time, you do have to read the really small print and have a very clear understanding of, this technology when you go to any platform and any service provider. What are your rights?
I've experienced negotiating service level agreements, but many times, even if I'm a, relatively large not-for-profit, I'm not as large as the vendors who are selling to me. And so I don't really always have control. I mean, I've definitely had situations where Microsoft will have an outage, but they declare it something else so that it doesn't become a part of their service level agreement. And I'm just a little bit player. There's nothing I can do about that. So I agree that you should negotiate hard, and I agree that you should understand what the terms of your agreement are, and also what the vendor is required to do in terms of disclosure, especially if it has to do with credit cards being made available or some sort of phishing or other kinds of attacks. But I think it's also the case that nonprofits can't always control those things, and the vendors sometimes have the cards in those cases.
I know we're going a little bit off schedule here, but how do you keep the cards on your side of the table in arrangements like this? For example, I mean, yes, some data was breached and through a data center, but in some cases there was one vendor where certain people were locked out of their systems completely. At what point is it not on the onus of the nonprofit to have a backup system in their own right, not just relying on the vendor, but having your own backup system that says, okay, we backed up 24 hours ago, we're moving it to this platform, and go fix it, and then we'll move back?
So I would say that you're right. We should all have our own backups, and that is something that I negotiate, that I want to be able to pull down a backup periodically. But also sometimes I think we do well, and I'll look to you, Paul, sometimes we do well when we work in concert with one another, because Microsoft might not listen to me, but they might listen to the sector as a whole. Or the vendors, of course, a vendor, particularly one like Black Book that's, focused on the sector, will listen when we raise our voices together. So that's one area where I think we can be more powerful if we work together.
I would echo that. I think that there is power in a united voice, and we've seen that many, many times in many different industries. And, I think that at the same time, organizations, we have to recognize that there's going to be a level of responsibility on us that we have to have, regardless of whatever might be in a contract. We've got to make sure that our organization has a plan for going forward. And these two ransom attacks are very good examples of that impacted so many of our clients. Many of our clients did not have backups. They were relying entirely on what they felt were, in the cloud or hosted, what I call partly cloudy, that there were safety nets there, and they didn't have to think about it, or they didn't have the funds to manage it. But we have to have a level of responsibility for ourselves as well.
Right, we should be testing our backup and restore. We should be like just part of our disaster preparedness, and that's hard, and it is something that tends to get pushed back, but it is important.
Just wandering around this.
Yes.
Yes, we have a network in the office, but this is what I unplug and walk out of the building with if there's a fire.
Yes.
Here's mine.
Yep.
Same thing. Because I don't want to lose even a day's work.
Right.
This will never happen when you got one of these sitting there.
Correct.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago reading in the technology press that, there's two kinds of hard drives. There are hard drives that have failed, and there are hard drives that are someday going to fail. And I always carry that around, I don't want to lose too much work, and I want to be careful about that. So
Okay, what are some of the other things you're seeing, Emily, out there? Give me a couple of 3 or 4 ideas of some of the some of the nonprofits that haven't updated their technology. Obviously, not telling us who, but some of the challenges you've been seeing out there.
Well, in one case, I was in the middle of a modernization and centralization project with a not-for-profit. And before we had centralized cash management, one office initiated a multi-million-dollar wire transfer that would have gone to a fraudulent recipient, except that the bank caught it and realized that it was non-typical for that office. And that, in a way, helped our process of modernizing and centralizing, because it became apparent that there were some people in our finance team who were really steeped in what the latest fraudulent tricks were, and that other people weren't. And so it was helpful to have the people who were most steeped in the tricks be doing the wire transfers and not have that ability more widely spread. And you know, the person was a wonderful person, but just not steeped in all the tricks that were going on. So that was very scary, because of course, no one can afford to lose that kind of money.
Jackie, how about you?
Oh my goodness, I have so many stories. Well,
The clean ones.
so, well, you know, we had a client we were working with. They were in the process of upgrading their system. We were working with them. And they had been on their legacy system for about 20 years, totally outgrown it. And, but they believed their legacy system was the Bible. It was correct. And their new system, we needed to make sure we were validating to their legacy system's data. Well, we had one exercise on billing, which, you know, is hugely important for organizations, contract funded organization. And we spent over 40 hours trying to validate and unable to come to match what was in their legacy system. And at the end of the 40 hours, we determined that their legacy system was incorrect, and they had been billing incomplete dollars for years,
Wow.
leaving money on the table for years and costing their organization, and they literally had no clue. And I had another situation where I actually had to call the CEO. My organization was concerned. They saw some things that they were questioning, and it was around the bank reconciliations. Like, what we try to do is we try to make sure we're aligned with the organization and helping them. A new system comes up. We go to do the bank reconciliations. They couldn't get with the individual doing the bank reconciliations to get the project finished. And so I called the CEO stating that I had a concern. We needed to finish this for them. And our natural, and I totally get this, the natural reaction often is, my team knows what they're doing. I have trust and faith in my team. Unfortunately for that organization, it ended up being fraud. And, you know, we face these kind of things all the time. And it's a merger of the technology and human effort. And both of those are part of a technology. A machine alone, software alone, isn't the answer. It doesn't do it all.
Right. It's funny you should say that. I mean, you could find a nonprofit we've got the best technology on the face of the earth. You're supposed to have 3 or 4% of your total budget in technology. We've got 10 or 11 or 12%. We've got all the technology you could possibly imagine. But then low tech hits you. Somebody makes a phone call, somebody answers an email, somebody picks up a flash drive in a parking lot, and presto, it's all over. So what are some of the low tech things you should be thinking about?
Well, certainly education and training. I mean, there are like online classes, like at one organization, we had everybody, and especially the top executives, take an online class about phishing, because because fraudsters that don't know the organization will go for the top executives, because those are the obvious emails that they'll try to replicate, and use phishing techniques to try to get people to transfer money to them. So education and training, and particularly of the top people, is really critical. And helping all the staff to have some healthy skepticism about testing. You know, like if the president has never asked you to do a wire transfer without sending paperwork before, why would the president ask for that now?
Yeah, and I think that security, it's not a communicate at once environment. It is something that has to be communicated ongoing all the time, and have, you know, protocols in place for regular updates on security and, you know, dual authentication, verification, all of those things in place. So use the technology where you can, as along with educating and informing your staff.
What about not wanting to take responsibility for the fire drill that's going to occur as you try to move over your CMS system to another area, or to do some more security within that system? Who's got to stand up and take responsibility for that and say, we're going here, whether you like it or not? And sometimes that isn't the CEO.
So I'll speak as a as a CFO and CFAO. Many times it falls to that role to be the advocate, and, you know, with the head of technology in many cases, to be the advocate for new technology and to convince the rest of the executive team and to engage the board to make the change that needs to be made. And I think one of the challenges is that major donors to the organization fall in love with the mission of the organization, and that's why they support the mission and that, you know, the organization, and that's true of the board members also. So sometimes it's less compelling to them to hear about why you need to make these not maybe so fascinating technology upgrades and changes and drills, as you said, but you need to, because you need to give your staff the support that they need so they can implement the mission.
Give or take 140 years ago, when I first got into reporting, I was at a daily newspaper, and we were on Underwoods, and we were moving over to the computer system. I said, hey, give the kid the computer, he'll figure it out. So I got the computer, and a few others of us got the computer. And I got to be really, really good at getting to the C prompt and fixing things. Now, good luck. I can barely turn the thing on. Everything really has changed, and it's changed dramatically, so that people sometimes don't understand the implications of what they're doing, or how they're doing it. Let me give you an example. Everybody's talking about AI. It's going to change what everything's, and everybody says, yeah, we got to do AI. I guarantee you, if you went to 5 people who are not tech folks in the nonprofit space, they would know what AI stood for, but have no idea what it means. Somebody take us to school on this, and why is this AI going to be so important to nonprofits?
So I am on the strong belief and a proponent that AI is going to be a game changer for organizations. And part of that is in the safety net that it will provide for organizations, the streamlining of activities that it will provide, and to think about it in very straightforward, day to day, how would it impact me? An example might be an individual is just simply entering information in, very straightforward data entry, updating records. AI will take what they entered, and they will it can look at it and say, this is commissions, but it's being charged to, another department, or a program that the computer knows there has never been an entry being charged to that department or that location or that grant ever before. And the software itself will pop up and say, this is outside your normal transaction definitions. Are you sure this is correct? In the most straightforward terms, it can look and look at any level of data that is conceivably going in, where that data is going in. And it will also be able to look at trends or activity over, say, a rolling 12 or 24-month basis, and think how valuable it would be if it can then project forward based on the information that is already in your system on your historical data, what it is seeing without someone else having to go in and analyze it. These are the kinds of things that AI is going to bring right to nonprofit organizations.
Now, there's got to be a human component to that, right? You're actually going to be the one making the decision. The computers, the system is just making suggestions, but it's going to be a human function to make that change, correct?
Correct, correct. So instead of having to spend time analyzing and figuring it out, the computer will bring the data to us. It'll bring it to the surface quicker for us so that we can then make decisions quicker.
And I can see that this could help in client-side activities also. If I'm working with a client, it'd be really helpful to have a quickly distilled synthesis of things that have worked for clients that are maybe experiencing the same issues. So that might help. And just making services available to clients, and particularly clients who are not always on devices, is another area of challenge for not-for-profits. And I think maybe AI can help with figuring out, how can we be better at enrolling and reaching out to the people who need our services, benefit from our services.
Imagine software with the ability to take actual budgets and history and turn them into forward-looking projections. How's AI going to help us with that? How is AI and the other technology we're working with actually going to help us project budgets and maybe even programmatic decisions in the future?
We have to have the human element, right? But what we're doing is using the AI to take the information that is in the system that has been, gathered and created and brought in, and consolidate all of that information and bubble it up to the surface and say, here's where we are and here's what we have, and here's some decision points for you, to highlight those areas that should be looked at. And then the human element, they're not spinning their wheels, investing hours to get to the data, right? Because it's all about data today. So instead of investing the hours to get to the data is going to be there and surfaced. Now the investment of the time and the creativity and the innovation that the human being brings to it is they're able to look at this data and say, you know what, that's right, that program is registering at that. We are perhaps need additional funds in that program, but that's a conscious decision we're doing in the furtherance of our mission. And that is the human element that combines so powerfully with software being able to bring that visibility up to the surface.
And I think it will also help us, reproject, because one thing we've learned with this COVID environment is that there's so many scenarios we have to do. Like, we might have thought in the old days it was good enough to do high, low, and middle, and now we need to really be able to think about a whole bunch of different scenarios and possibilities. And so we really need help in being able to synthesize those and figure out what are the, as Jackie said, the critical points, and then what is the flow looks like from there.
Give us a couple of ideas on that, Emily. Obviously, people started working remotely very quickly, and they had not planned on working remotely very quickly. Are nonprofits now going to have to change the way their security access codes systems are working so that people can have access from outside when they were generally on the network and the network was closed? How can we allow people into the system and still protect it at the same time?
Well, Jackie talked before about multi-factor authentication. So everybody should be doing that. And that helps, at least that this is their PC. And so that when they're accessing the system, it's a known PC that they're accessing it from. So those kinds of tools, nonprofits should, if they haven't put them in already, they definitely will want to be investing in those. And those are not so hard. Those are really just convincing people that it's worth the pain of doing it and then redoing it periodically, so that you have some sense of who's accessing your system.
What about the ability of a nonprofit organization to monitor what its employees are doing online during the day? I mean, you don't expect me to, if I'm sitting at my desk at the office, to be checking bourbon sites.
So at one organization, we started doing this, especially if you have 24-hour staff, because sometimes the night shift could be quiet, and sometimes you need to have somebody because something might happen. But that tends to be where staff will spend a lot of time on non-work related activities. So usually the first thing, so first of all, IT will know. I mean, if you're monitoring the stuff, you're going to know what people are what sites they're hitting. So the first thing we usually do is tell them, by the way, we noticed you're on social media a lot, this % of the time. Our norm is this % of the time, like maybe people check their email at lunch, you're exceeding the norm. So usually we have a couple of sort of gradated conversations with people, and at some point it becomes it becomes something that if they're not doing their work and they're on Facebook all day, they'll be terminated. But
people are at home. If I'm at home doing it, how do you monitor what people are doing at home when they're not on your network, when they're supposed to be working?
I have to talk to somebody else to find out how you can do that. But if they're logged in through your system, you would know what they're doing. If you're doing it outside of the system, they might. And also some organizations' laptops, the laptop is really the organization. So for example, my husband has a work issued laptop. He does not do any non-work issued activities on his laptop, among other things, because he needs to meet security protocols for government and other agencies. So that's just a work laptop. So if you're an agency that's security conscious, that is, you have, an air gap. You only use your work laptop for work.
In the cloud applications versus the on-prem. So on-prem is, an organization's software is sitting on servers in their organization. They might have 1 server, 5 servers, whatever, and it's managed by your IT department. There's then the hosted environment, which is, it's your information. You might have dedicated servers, but it's being managed outside of your organization. And then there's the true cloud environment, what we call the multi-tenant. In the cloud environment, Big Brother is alive and well. So it's not only a factor of are you signed in? Is a user signed into an application? But there's all types of audit trails and identifiers to say what are they doing in the application? What have they changed? How many hours are they in there? So you can have a lot of visibility to the activities within your organization in the new technologies around the cloud. The hosted environment, what I call the partly clouding, and the on-prem, then it's you can have still a level of visibility to it, but it's very much dependent on your service provider, either your internal service provider or external. And you've got a few more hoops to jump through versus a cloud application. You could run a report most typically.
And you may also want to have sort of some general reporting on what files your staff members are accessing. I had a situation with a staff member who said he was constantly working really late. And I said to the IT person, well, why, the IT team, what's he doing? And it turned out that part of what he was doing was trying to access files that he wasn't authorized to access. So that is maybe the combination of the AI and, as Paul said, the person.
Talking about data, you were talking about government a few minutes ago. How is all of this technology in the nonprofit space evolving so that there's an interconnection between government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector? And is that a good thing?
Well, it would be great if government would, and I'm particularly talking maybe about some local governments that I am aware of, would listen to the pain that they cause non-for-profits by not using sort of standardized methodology. So for example, they might have developed a new system, but the system doesn't accept uploads from anybody else's system. So your nonprofit might have automated yourself, but then you're rekeying stuff into a government system because the government system has decided not to allow you to upload. So that kind of thing can be really, really painful and duplicative of for not-for-profits. And governments also have the best data in many cases, and some people have, various organizations have pulled that data out and make that available, but that's another area I think of opportunity for governments to really help not-for-profits figure out how to help clients. And some of that is by data sharing and by data sharing in a more integrated way.
I agree. There's a tremendous amount of information and data that's gathered from all different sources. And the ability to have a repository that you would be able to access, and you would likewise be able to contribute your data into, would be, a game changer for so many programs and the services that so many organizations work to deliver. But instead we have a situation of, extremely siloed. And, JMT works with numerous federally qualified health centers, community action organizations, and, and so on and so forth. And there's just so much pockets of information all over. Each of them doing many of the same, having to do many of the same internal things that everybody else is doing, just because they have to do it that way.
So for example, I did a search for food banks in my area, and I wasn't able to find food banks that I knew existed. So we don't make available data that is helpful to people who need to have that data.
Right, lightning round, folks. It's 2025. What did you learn in 2020 that's going to be applicable, usable in 2025? And what will you be looking back on in 2025 and saying, geez, that technology just wasn't what it was supposed to be, and this is where we're going now?
It would be the ability to access my systems and data so that I can help my organization make decisions and pivot as needed.
And I think it would be really having good internal social media communications so that I'm not torturing everybody by email all day and all night.
Jackie Tissot, CEO and founder of JMT Consulting, and Emily Sachs, nonprofit executive and consultant to nonprofits. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul.